Okay, so on the slides, just think about the slides that you have and the good things that you've done with it. And then I'm going to give you just some really quick scoops on them. First thing, successful slides is get it working. Okay, is know your audience. Know your audience. Find out what the top 3 concerns are from the event planner or meeting planner, but know your audience. Know something about them. I remember Bette Midler was talking about she was on David Letterman, and they were talking about speaking to these big high level dental something or other, or surgeons. And he was like, oh, I bombed. She's like, that's because you didn't know your audience. She said, I looked them up. I knew exactly what kind of comedy they liked, and I gave it to them. I was like, go girl. So she totally nailed it. So know your audience. When I spoke to BYU Life After Divorce, it's at BYU. It's a BYU conference. I'm talking about, oh no, it wasn't Life After Divorce. It was the Writers Conference. Anyway, one of those, but I was talking about being able to, it was the Writers Conference, it was marketing to your audience. And so I showed that, I talked about the Old Spice commercial, and then I talked about how BYU did a parody on that with grades. And then I showed both of them, but I even, like on the Old Spice thing, I only showed here to here. I said, I know I'm at BYU and there's honor code, so I couldn't show his abs, everyone laughed. So we just had this funny thing with it. And then it's a BYU parody. So I knew my audience, and we had this fun little joke thing going back and forth that they knew I got them. A faux pas in that is that Sherry Dew was speaking at BYU, and she's driving down with Wendy Nelson. And what color is Sherry wearing? She's wearing red. And Wendy gets in the car and said, Sherry, you got the wrong color. And Sherry was like, oh my gosh, did not even think about it. So know your audience and speak and dress accordingly, but make sure your slides have things that can include them and can involve them. Either it's a signature alignment for your brand, or if it's, say you're speaking in Hawaii, maybe you've got some Hawaiian nods to your slides. I don't know, but something, examples from maybe Hawaii or whatever, but that would showcase something and liken it to the stories that you're telling. So know your audience. Second is consider the venue, space, and number of people. When you're doing your slides, you want to get an idea of how big your font needs to be, how much color you want to use, how the space is going to be used. If you're going to have 2 screens, one on each side, or if it's going to be behind you, then you want to make sure you ask for the podium to be moved to the side so you're not standing directly in front of it. Or if it is, then you make sure that you take a lavalier mic and you stand with your remote to the side of your slides. But make sure you have an idea of the number of people that you're going to be speaking to. That will shift the way you do your slides. The more people that you have, the less interactive you're going to be able to be. So the more thought-provoking question you want to put up, or the more show don't tell slides you want to do, so that people are really having more of that experience rather than you're doing more of a training kind of a teaching feel. So something to consider on that. If you have questions, just unmute as I go. So like for this example, I was speaking at BYU 3 times in a week and a half. So the one on the left is when I was speaking to the Women's Empowerment Seminar. It was at the BYU Wilkinson Center. It's kind of a straight across, regular height ceiling for that kind of a conference center in the building. And the lighting was fluorescent. So I knew that I was going to need to have a deep color, that orange, in order for it to show really well, because the lights were going to probably stay on. This is where you want to make sure you don't have a white background slide. This is when that will really save you. Also, the room is only about 100 girls, 100 women. So I knew that I could be a little bit more interactive with what I was doing. The one on the right, that's where I was talking to the experiential design classes. And this one, they had me in an auditorium. So I was down below at the bottom and everybody else was going up in that theater seating. So I knew that my slides, I didn't want the fonts being so horrendously huge that it looks out of place, but I wanted them big enough that people could read them. And then again, my placement, I wanted to make sure I was standing to the side and not interfering with any of the writing or the fonts. The last one is when I was in another experiential design class, and you can see the ceiling is super low. It's very theater in the round kind of a feel, just kind of cut off on the one half, but it's very, it's stacked so that it's got those rows, and it's very intimate. It's very close. They were right there with me. They could see exactly what I was doing. That some people could see my second monitor that had my notes on it and stuff. So it's very intimate. So that's a good time to have interactive slides where you're asking them questions and then you put up things or whatever it is that you want, but it's interactive. So remember, just know your venue space and number of people. The next one is choose relevant graphics and highlights. So when you're doing a particular graphic, use a picture that will show, don't tell what you're doing. But if you're also doing like a quote or something like that, I invite you to not just do the quote every single time. Like gray background, white lettering, just show the quote. If you want to get more engagement, consider showing the white and then the next slide highlights, grayed out or whited out or something on the words that highlights the words. So like when I was doing women's conference, I was being very clear about the learning from this verse. And I talked about how the Lord talked with the brother of Jared, he chastened him, and then he repented. And so I was making a point about finding different words that could be interchanged for that. So there was a reason why those words stood out. So I highlighted those things on the graphic. Make it easy for your audience to know what you're talking about. If they're sitting and reading that quote and trying to figure out what point you were making, what word were you talking about, what was it that you were focused on, they're going to miss what you're saying. So make it super easy for them to know what you want them to focus on. And you can do that with graphics or highlights. I love Lamira sent in one of her slides, and it has like, you know, that line that has the little bubbles as you go from step to step. So every time she's talking about a step, the bubble gets colored in, the bubble gets colored in, bubble gets colored in. So it's just a good way for people to easily find the flow. And that's where you're using your highlights in your graphics. All right, use color background with light letters. And I just kind of alluded to that. I actually did intentionally a white background for my NSA slides, because most of that slide, does anyone remember what my 5 P's of performance, what was most of the slide? Anyone remember? Yeah, it was a picture, right? So I wanted the contrast of the black and white to be super clear so they would remember pace, pause. They would just remember that super clear. And then most of the whole slide was a picture. So pace had picture of people in a marathon, their legs running, so people could remember that pace. So I wasn't too worried about that, but really try to avoid the white. There's only one other time that I generally use white, and I'll show you in a second. So when I say color background, we use 3 different colors for our signature colors. We have orange, and it's a soft creamsicle deepened orange. So it's not a bright in your face construction orange, but it's not a soft, fluffy orange. And then we have gray, which is close to silver, and then white. And I tend to use them in certain ways. So orange and gray, I will use them for quotes, but the orange for sure, I use them for titles and headers. So that every time someone sees that orange, they know that's a new concept, generally speaking, or it's going to be a scriptural quote, a conference quote. So I love choosing a color that will generally be headers, new titles, things like that, because that gets connected in their brain. And then I'll use the gray to interchange the orange, just because I use a lot of quotes. I like to not just have it be orange, orange, orange. So I'll go gray and orange back and forth. But the gray, I also will use sometimes for just a singular thing. So if I say purpose changes everything, I'll use a gray with the white. Purpose changes everything. And that's all, just right there. So it's really easy for them to, it's memorable. Now, the other color I'll use, this is where I use the white, because I have so many colored slides, it's almost all colored slides. The white actually breaks that up. And I usually use the white for a question or something interactive. So if I'm going to ask them a question, if I'm going to have them have a thought-provoking question, I'm going to use this white, but notice it's got my signature daisy, Gerber daisy with it. So I'm still branded. And usually I have the DTL logo on the bottom. This one I pulled from a presentation I didn't want to have DTL on. It was probably Education Week. But that way that it's really clear what your branding is, but still I got all these colors, and then boom, white just kind of, oh, wow, there's white. It gives a break to that sort of monotony of color or pictures or whatever. It actually adds as that release. And then just a couple of rules for successful slides. There's a couple of different ones. There's the 5-5-5 rule or the 7-7-7 rule. It depends on which one you need to use for your information, but that's 5 max word per line and 5 lines per slide. Now, take it with a grain of salt. I actually try to go by this. Sometimes there's quotes that you just have to have that 8th line in there because it makes the difference between separating between 2. But if I get a quote that's more than those lines, usually I'm not picking out the best meat. However, there are some times when it's a 2-parter for me. I absolutely have to have those two parts. Maybe it's a Bruce R. McConkie quote or it's an Eli Maxwell, and you just can't say it better than the way they've said it. So do it in a two-parter. Don't be afraid of doing a two-parter. When you do that, you want an ellipses at the end. So maybe you say, when he saw Jesus through the veil, ... Then your next slide would have the ellipses at the beginning, ... and then would continue with that. And then you would cite the person that was speaking, Russell M. Nelson. Remember, in your slides, the way that they're doing it is they don't say elder or sister. They just give the name, Russell M. Nelson, David A. Bednar. They just give the name. And remember, Sister Nelson is Wendy Nelson. She's not going by Wendy Watson Nelson anymore. Some other rules to keep in mind. And again, these are not hard and fast, but they are helpful. They are really helpful to keep us from doing the slide overwhelm where we have 600 lines and then we've squeezed them in a super small font. The 10, 20, 30 is the Kawasaki rule. 10 slides for about 20 minutes of content and no less than a 30 font size. I tend to like 40, 44, just because it's big and I speak in more bigger venues. And the rule is you want the last person in the last row to be able to read your slide. So when you're in a bigger venue like that, you definitely want to make sure that it's readable. You don't want it obnoxious, but you definitely want it readable. Now, this is a give or take, but I find that I do 5 to 7 slides per 10 minutes of my stuff, but that's because I usually have a lot more quotes. So if you have quotes, that makes sense. But if you've got a lot of just stats and information heavy, then you're either doing a training or a workshop. But if it's a keynote, it's probably not helpful. And then the other thought they have is one idea for 5 slides. And I tend to go by that. Like I said, 5 to 7 slides. This is kind of how I roll. I share the slide that has like number 1, the principle, and then I like doing like a 1/3, 2/3 slide. So I have the principle on the left, and then I have a picture of it on the right. I like people having a picture memory to go back through and really associate it with that, because we know that 85% of all learning is visual. So if they have a picture, they can remember pace because of the marathon legs, and that helps them remember what it is. But you don't have to do that. But if you think principle, and then you're going to share maybe the principle, the why behind it, a stat, and then maybe you're going to have a quote or a stat that you put up. And then you're going to have a picture that breaks up. Now you've had 2 bits of writing. Now you're going to have a picture that breaks that up, and you're going to tell a story. That's a great way to go about that. And then next, you're going to have maybe that white slide or a slide that has a question, a thought-provoking question that gets them engaged. And then you're going to cement what you just said by having that closing quote on that section. And that's kind of generally the flow that I do. Doesn't mean you need to do that flow. Find the flow that feels good to you. But that's what generally works for me. And it kind of keeps the rhythm. I know how long it takes me to share 5 to 7 slides. And I know if I'm going fast or slow, and I know if I need to add on something or not, and how much leeway. So it's given me a good rhythm. So, sorry. I'm serious. I've never done such a bad job on slides in my life. Honest to Pete, it's so funny. I'm so glad, because it's a great example of what not to do. So on this, this is a good way of showing where stories or pictures would come into play. So I saw this when I was at this Christ-centered event in our stake, and then I looked closer and I realized it was all by dots. And then I looked closer again and I saw that the dots were all in sections. And then they had given it to the young men, young women with the instructions on where to put the dots, what color to put where the dots. And then they put the whole thing together. So this is what I used in my women's conference talk to be able to show something. And that's what I mean. That would be a good picture or something to break up the writing of stuff. And I did 2 slides on this because it made sense. You had the far away and then you had the up close. And then I repeated these slides at the end of my talk to remind them what I shared at the beginning when I talked about Christ-like traits or about developing those. So this is a great way to show, don't tell, about developing. And then I referred to it during my talk, and then I closed with it at the end of my keynote. All right. That's the 5 tips to successful slides. Know your audience, consider the venue space and number of people, choose relevant graphics and highlights, use color background with light letters, and use correct font, number of lines, and slides. All right, great job. Any questiones? Any thoughts or additions, or where you've seen this work or not work? After just coming, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, I love that last part, the one idea, 5 slides. So now that I just sent you my slides, now I feel like I need to go change things. So
For you last week, and I kept thinking, I thought, oh, Heavenly Father, I hope this doesn't make more work for them. So sorry, that is my bad. But again, it's just a rule of thumb. And if you can do less slides, that's even better. So just so you know, you don't have to have 5 slides for one idea. I personally, if I can get away with it, the only reason I have slides like that is because I have, like I said, quotes. But if you just have 3 slides for an idea and you have them be more interactive, more thoughtful, put on meditative music if you're talking about be still, right? And have them actually do it. When I was at the NSA one, remember I was talking about the stance. Now, Cheryl Knowlton had 21 things in 20 minutes that you could do. She didn't have time to help them apply it. And I personally don't think that's a good plan. I think it's better for them to have one idea and actually do something with it and feel the Costco sample of shift when they leave than to hammer them with a whole bunch. Although there is a place for that. There really is a place for that. And if there's ever a place for that, get paid to speak for 20 minutes is a great thing to do that for, because it's just kind of fun. It breaks up kind of the usual monotony of how everybody's doing it. But if you can get them to do something right then, where like Sydney Jakes, she talked about the chocolate chip cookie story and she handed out a chocolate chip cookie to everybody. I don't necessarily recommend that, but that's what she did. For me, Cheryl had talked about the stance, the power stance, and then just kind of touched it and went on. I talked about the power stance. I showed the picture of Amy Cuddy, who did the TEDx talk. Several people raised their hands that they had seen that talk. So this is all engaging their brain. Oh, retention, recognition. Yes. And connection. Yes. I know what she's talking about. Yes, that works. And then what did I do? I had them stand up and actually do a power stance. Now, we didn't have time to do 2 minutes. Oh, you're so sweet. I didn't have time to do a full 2 minutes, but I gave them a Costco sample. I gave them a taste of it. And now they've physically done it. So what will happen? How likely are they to remember it? Pretty likely, because now they've seen it, they've heard it, they've engaged a part of their brain with it, and it's brought it to the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, and they've done a physical action to do with it in just that short period of time. Can you see how quickly you can actually help them do something that's interactive that can make it happen? So if you have a choice, less slides, more interaction. That's what I would encourage. But that's just good rule of thumb.
next question, do you have to put every quote on a slide? Because right now I have 17 slides because I have a lot of quotes, and they're not all quotes, but there's a lot. And so as I'm doing this, I was remembering how you're talking about how you don't want like a million slides. And so I just was like, well, which ones would I use? Which ones would I not? You know, do you need to have them all in there? Because I didn't even do any question slides or anything like that because I already had so many.
And in fact, I encourage you to not do every quote on slides. In fact, it's even more impressive to an audience, especially on the shorter quotes, if you can memorize those. And there's quotes that I have just, I know from conference talks and things like that, that I use them and then I just can rip them off. And I'll say, you know, President Nelson said, blah, blah, blah. And I say it in a quoting voice, if that makes sense. President Nelson has said, the Lord loves effort. Effort brings rewards. So people know that I'm actually quoting, right? Same thing with the scripture, if you can do that, or you can just read it from a paper. I'll bring a paper that has extra quotes, and if I have time, then I'll add on a quote, and then I'll just give the reference. This is from the Spirit of God, blah, 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 and then I'll share the whatever. Now, oftentimes people will come up afterwards and they'll say, can I get a copy of your presentation, your slides? Just a heads up that you can make the final call on that, but I generally do not give my presentations. If you talk to anyone in the NSA, they're like, heck no. That is your content. You've spent hours on those slides. You do not just give those away willy-nilly. There's times that I've just given it, depends on like as the experiential design, I'm like, take them, just take them. I doubt anyone's going to go back and look at them, but I'm super happy to give them to them. But especially if you're at a paid engagement, you do not give your slides at all. So you can, if they're going to pay extra for it, or if they make a certain deal with you or whatever, but I would say no. But what I do is when people come up after and they want my slides, this just happened at Women's Conference. She's like, can I have a copy of your presentation like right now? And I said, no, actually, I don't do that. But if you want to email me, go to my website, email that you came to this conference and ask for a copy of the quotes. And I always usually have a page that has a copy of my quotes so I can copy and paste. And I can either, I say, I'll give you a page of my quotes, a copy of my quotes, or I'll say, I'll give you the list of the talks that I pull my quotes from. And that way that they can go back, and I say, it's actually more powerful if you go read the talks and you can find the quotes that mean the most to you. That's a really good way to handle that I found anyway.
I actually love that you bring that up because somebody at the Speaker in a Day event trying to give us feedback. Oh, it'd be better if you had the slide and then we could take notes and the slide and you can take notes. And I don't know about you, but I know in college when people do that, it drove me nuts.
Yes.
Because it goes against what we train about going with the Spirit. And I know it was because it was more of a teaching thing, but I really love that you shared that because as we become business owners, speakers, it becomes proprietary content.
Yes.
And so then people know they'll respect that because then they'll respect their own. And instead of going, oh yeah. So I love how you handled that.
Thank you. And it's not, I mean, it's all the Lord's, we know that, but it's that professionalism. We're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks or next week. It's that professionalism, and that's what's expected in a professional setting. And that proprietary content, you want to let people know, no, this took time and energy and faith and revelation and all of those things. So make sure that you just set that boundary early. Also on, oh, there was something I was going to say and I can't remember, but it'll come to me. Any other questions?
What about video content? What's the rule on video?
Make sure that it's approved, it's not copywritten. And Lamira probably has a little bit more on that, but make sure one thing on your slides, make sure your video is embedded in your presentation. And then when you send it to someone, a lot of times if you're going to be at a conference, they're going to want you to send it so they can put it on one big thing. You want to send the video itself to them so they can download it on their device. Otherwise, the video will not play. So it will show like it's going to play, but they won't have it on their device to be able to have it upload at that time. So you want to send your presentation with the video embedded, they can see where it is, and then the actual video itself in the same email. So there's no confusion.
It's the same. So we had this situation with NSA Get Paid to Speak. So if somebody asks for a Google slide with it, then have that video there. I would recommend, and I was going to share this with you too, if you're going to show it, don't rely on somebody's internet to just send them the YouTube link. Because most of the times in PowerPoint, you just embed it from a YouTube link, right? And what happens is you'll get somewhere in their internet connection, and colleges are notorious for and churches. Have you ever felt like you try to present in Young Women's or Relief Society and it's like a black hole? So what you need to do is be able to download it. And from YouTube, I'll give you this little trick, but just as a heads up, what you do is you need to go, you can find, we did this with Facebook Lives as well. You search for a YouTube downloader or a Facebook Live downloader, and make sure you find one that doesn't ask for your email or anything like that. What it will just say is put the link in here and then download it. And then you can download it to your device. And then I would recommend citing it on your underneath, like where you got. So like, for instance, I'm going to be using Brené Brown's on empathy, and I want to make sure I cite it and where I got it from. So that way people know that I'm not just stealing her content, right? But in order for it to work on my PowerPoint, I need to download it to my computer. And so that way I'm showing it, but then I'm leading them back to her and giving her credit for it. And then that way you have it saved. When it's in Google, somebody want Google Slides, save it to your Google Drive and then share that link with them. Because if they present, that's what they were doing at NSA, is sharing from Google. So he needed access to Connie's video and I just shared the link with him. Then he's able to play it from Google Slides, because it'll say, oh, it's here. But like Connie said, it won't be able to play if they do not own the video or have it on their device.
On their drive, if it's Google Slides. Yep. Perfect.
How do you know if it's, like you said, like copyrighted or whatever? Because the video I have on mine is from, I believe it's like Finding Faith in Christ, like that scene where they're on the water in the boat. Like, how do you know if you're allowed to use stuff or not?
I would go to the website of the person and see if it's on there. And if not, you can send an email and say, I would like to use your video. Can you give me permission to do so? Or do I need special permission? Do you have any other thoughts, Lamira?
The church, if it's something like from the church,
it's fine.
You can use it, but you can't use it behind like a paywall. Does that make sense? Like it needs to be that you say, because they're like, as long as you're spreading the good news and you're using it, but still always citing the source. That is the biggest concern with creators, is that you don't give them proper credit. But if you give them credit and say, this is from so-and-so, then most people are okay with it as long as you are sending them back to where
To
you
the original. And they're actually pretty happy about it because you're spreading their information. So that's just, I think that's a great rule of thumb. Just always cite.